Well, folks, it looks like Wizards of the Coast is continuing their trend into 2024 of doing things that aren't exactly pro customer. And of course, as you might have guessed from the video title, this one has to do with translation and localization of the game to the Portuguese language, specifically Brazil. But before we get into that, of course, if you haven't already, please do click the subscribe button and the bell icon for notifications on videos just like this, upcoming live streams with guests, actual plays, and a whole host of other features we offer here on the Delver's Dungeon. And of course, I would like to remind you that this video is brought to you by our friends at Hellebarde Games. Hellebarde makes the kind of adventures they'd like to play, whether it's for Castles and Crusades, the OSR, or 5th edition D&D. Old School is in play at the table, and you can check them out on DriveThruRPG or on their website, hellebardegames.com. They are linked in the description below. So this came out a couple of days ago. Apparently, Wizards of the Coast has elected to drop all language support for Portuguese, leaving Brazilian gamers high and dry. And this article actually comes to us from Game Rant. So let's take a quick look and see what they've got to say. Dungeons & Dragons no longer supporting one language. Wizards of the Coast has revealed that Dungeons & Dragons will be ending official translation support for one language later this year. And, you know, that's on the heels of them releasing a new edition. This is by Michael Brandon Ingram, and I will link to the original article so you can check it out. Wizards of the Coast is ending official Portuguese translations for Dungeons & Dragons sourcebooks, according to a recent announcement. The decision to end Portuguese support was due to, quote, rising costs, end quote, and will leave only 6 officially supported languages. The announcement comes as Dungeons & Dragons gears up to roll out its major 1D&D expansion. That's 6th edition, to those of us who don't want to speak corporatese. Expansion later this year featuring major changes to the game's rule set. You know, a new edition. That's what we know it as. Beloved tabletop role-playing game Dungeons & Dragons has revealed that the company will end official Portuguese translations for the game's sourcebooks following this year. First released nearly 50 years ago, the tabletop it is 50 years ago. It is 50 years ago. The tabletop RPG, now published by Wizards of the Coast, has become one of the world's most iconic tabletop games. The game has featured multiple iterations throughout its long life, with Wizards of the Coast regularly expanding Dungeons & Dragons with new sourcebooks, modules, and rule sets. Now, however, the developer is reportedly set to end support for one language. With a game played around the world, Dungeons & Dragons features a plethora of translations for players in many different languages to enjoy the RPG. Wizards of the Coast officially supports Dungeons & Dragons in 7 different languages with English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, Spanish, and Portuguese versions of its materials. Wizards had previously licensed international translation to developer Gale Force 9 before taking over its global releases in 2022. Now, Dungeons & Dragons is set to end support for its Portuguese translations. As reported by Comic Book, an official announcement from Dungeons & Dragons has revealed that the game will be shelving its Portuguese translations. I think they probably mean an official announcement from Wizards of the Coast. According to the post, the official end of support for the game's Portuguese translation is set to arrive, quote, later this year, end quote, with Dungeons & Dragons proceeding only with 6 officially supported languages. The developer also revealed that the last 3 D&D expansions that will be supported in Portuguese with Fizzban's Treasury of Dragons, Journeys Through the Radiant Citadel, and Dragonlance Shadow of the Dragon Queen. Wizards of the Coast cited, quote, rising costs, end quote, as a major factor behind the change. And there's the tweet from Wizards D&D. We are making the difficult decision to halt Portuguese products later this year. We'll continue to release D&D products in English, French, German, Italian, Japanese, and Spanish. The announcement shelving of the announced shelving of Dungeons & Dragons Portuguese version has seen plenty of backlash from fans. Many angry players have cited rising popularity of Dungeons and Dragons in Portuguese speaking markets, particularly Brazil. Fans also lamented the slow release of many Dungeons and Dragons products have seen in Portuguese regions, with the Player's Handbook releasing several years later than its English launch. Some have even said that the change represented Dungeons and Dragons, quote, turning its back, end quote, on a growing community of players. The sunsetting of the Portuguese version comes as Dungeons and Dragons has major changes on the horizon for the beloved game. WotC recently revealed the release date for its source books, the next major update to Dungeons and Dragons gameplay. Guys, it's a new edition of the game. They'll feature major changes for several of the game's core classes, also being compatible with D&D 5th edition content. D&D 6th Ed looks to revolutionize D&D, while Portuguese-speaking fans will say goodbye to the game's official translations. And this has not gone down well. This has not gone down well with D&D fans in Brazil, and I want to highlight one post in particular. Now, this comes from Reddit, but I think we can definitely say that we understand this person's unhappiness, and I'll link to this in the article below too, because I think this guy's statement here really speaks to how Brazilian gamers are getting along. Hey guys, I'm Brazilian and I can say that it's Wizard's fallacy. Here in Brazil, it's very difficult for people to speak English, and newbies who aren't familiar with the game have only two options: to speak their language or to have a huge desire to play and try to understand the minimum of the cards in English and still try to learn the game, which normally the younger people just give up. But it is a fact that Wizards are doing this for the simple fact that they have more printers printing a dozen editions and secret layers per year, as we've seen them have delays in distribution because they can't print. So it's a matter of reducing the languages to have more printers printing more things. That's easy to notice. And they get a comment down below: Brazil is getting effed from all sides. I remember seeing somewhere that Xbox doubled their price on the Series S in Brazil. That goes into some other things. A few years after the discontinuation of the language, Wizards will come saying that it's not worth worrying about Brazil because it sells poorly, that it's their own mistake. And, I tend to agree with that point of view, that if you make the products unavailable, you can't then turn around and say the products don't sell well. And I think this will bear out. Now, the rather ridiculous assumption that D&D is somehow not popular in Brazil just kind of blows my mind, because we've all seen the Nissan commercial. I believe it's a Nissan commercial from Brazil, a live action commercial that had the fidelity of a big screen film production that featured the gang from the D&D cartoon. That's right, the 1980s D&D cartoon was massive in Brazil and had a huge following, which is why a car company, of all people, included Dungeons and Dragons in their automobile ad, but only in Brazil, because it is enormous popular there. Dungeons and Dragons is. So the fact that they just arbitrarily decided that millions of gamers don't deserve to play the game anymore, and now they're going to say, well, see, it doesn't sell down there, is kind of mind-blowing. Now, one thing I can tell you from personal experience, for many years back in the 1990s, I actually worked in a touristy area here in Central Florida, and we had a lot of Brazilian tourists, and a lot of them were very enthusiastic gamers, be it computer games or tabletop. And most of our tourists for a good section of the year were from Brazil. I think this is a huge, huge mistake and a terrible misstep on Wizards of the Coast's part. But then again, of course, what's new? A terrible misstep from Wizards of the Coast. But enough about what I'm saying. I want to know what you think. So please leave a comment down below. Let me know what you think. Are you from Brazil? Do you have do you have a horse in this race? Do you feel like you're getting short shrift from Wizards of the Coast, or Maybe you're in another predominantly non-English speaking language area and you're wondering if Wizards of the Coast is about to cut your throat too when it comes to gaming support. But either way, I'd love to hear from you about this. So let me know in the comments below what you have to say about it. I'd love to hear from you. But until the next video, guys, be good to each other. And, wherever you are in the world, keep rolling the dice because we've still got plenty of D&D to play. Peace.